Okay, so now to add in our fun new density and velocity fields into the simulation itself. So let's see where we put it. Oh yeah, StopNet 1. Dive right on in there. We're going to start over again basically. So go ahead, pop a pyrosolver down. He's angry because he doesn't actually have a smoke object hooked up to it. So this time we're not going to use this initial data thing here with the density saw path. What we're going to do instead is do a source volume. The source volume is more or less made to coincide one-to-one with the fluid source over here. In fact, I believe they have the same icon on them. Yes, it does. Great, that proves that. Typically, we put this one here, sourcing post solve, because that's literally what we're doing. So there we go. This we're going to actually make that a little bigger. Now in this lesson, we're actually going to use a dynamic resizing coming up. For now, we're basically going to define the maximum bounds it's allowed to get, but you'll see later how interactive that becomes. Okay, so we press play, and as usual, of course, nothing happens because there's nothing here. Smoke object 1, good. Division size, make it smaller, cool. So, volume path is going to be where it's actually looking to source all these wonderful things. Now, you'll notice in here actually there's a bunch of other presets depending on what you're doing. You can use volumes as collisions, so you can source those volumes into collide like this. You'll see there's different kinds of simulations entirely. Flip is a liquid simulator, like various waters and things. All kinds of stuff. The source smoke is the default, and that's great because that's exactly what we want. We're doing smoke today. You can click on this and point to it over in source land here, the source. I like to click and drag it over. Regular left click and drag, and there it is. And so now every frame is going to check this path. So not just the first frame, every frame is going to check that path as long as the activation is on. It's going to find, it's going to perform these operations. So source volume, it's going to add in any density it finds. Any temperature volumes that it finds, it will add them in. Now remember, we don't have a temperature volume, we have density and velocity. And velocity right now, it's just going to copy, it's going to overwrite whatever velocities are in those cells. I'm actually going to change this to add for now. And this will accumulate velocities, which can be problematic sometimes, but you'll see why it won't be soon. Cool. So when it says source volume, source temperature, and velocity, this soft to dot bindings is important. So source volume, temperature, and velocity, like we just saw. These are the names of the fields that it's going to look for. So for sourcing the density, it's looking for a density field. Now we have a density field. There it is, density. For velocity, it's looking for a vel. Now we have vel. Now for temperature, it's looking for temperature, and there isn't one. So it's actually not going to do anything for that one. But you can change them. If we wanted to add density to temperature, you could actually just type density here. And now it's going to use this density volume for both the smoke particulate and temperature. And temperature in a nutshell is usually used for buoyancy. Heat rises, of course, so it'll drive your smoke upwards. So if you're doing some sort of heat-related thing, that's important. For now, we're going to keep it like this. We actually might change that later, but let's keep it like that for now. Great. So simply pressing play, we should see this happen. So again, every single frame, we're adding density and velocity. So we're getting a pretty crazy looking sim going on here. Not bad though. Not bad at all. Let's take a stop here. We're going to do that a lot this lesson, where we're going to run out a few frames, and then we're going to see what it looks like. And while you're running these play blasts, or they're called flip books, of course, in Houdini. I still call them play blasts from Maya. And I'm going to press escape because we have enough frames by now. So there it is. That's what we made. Poosh, poosh, poosh. Pretty cool. You can see how violent it is from the expanding and contracting. Well, actually, I think we had some old frames in that one. So let's actually run that out again. And there you go. It's actually simulating so fast that the flipbook can't really keep up. So that's more what we should have seen. So there we go. Poosh, poosh. Pretty volatile. Looking pretty cool already. One thing I forgot to do is turn off these things. Or just dissipation anyway. We can add these microsolvers back in ourselves. And we will. For now, the main thing I wanted to do is add drag in. So drag is a force. In many ways, people think of it as the opposite of a force because drag actually tends to slow things down as opposed to propel them in any sort of direction. But really, it's a force being applied against the direction that things are moving in. In our case, we have velocity in our simulation. We can see it with the guides. Remember, we can turn on velocity here, and we'll see it. There it is. Poosh. Wonderful. Also, as a side note, you can see that it's only actually adding the velocity where that source is happening. So the rest of the simulation will inherit it eventually. It travels outwards over time. But at first, you can really see the effect of that source location. And actually, while we're on that note, a production-worthy tip here is you can mask things. You can use these masks. We can source the velocity only where there is incoming density. So watch what happens this way. Check that out. Very different, right? Only where there's density being added into the simulation are we getting it. So even though if we go back out here, well, actually, we can be nice and dynamic. I'm going to turn this into last selected node. So now when I click on this, we'll get the output of that over there instead. So now we're actually not seeing the simulation. Now we're seeing the fluid source. So the fluid source has crazy velocity everywhere in this cube, but only density really right here in the middle. So back over here in the simulation, if we aren't masking it, it's going to add all that velocity into the scene. That can be good. In fact, it's often good because you do often want to disturb the air ahead of the smoke so you get a nice crunchy look to it. But you may not want to for a variety of reasons. And if you don't want to, you can use the incoming density field to mask it. Oops, actually, I masked the source density with the density field, which is why nothing happened. There we go. Now you can see what we're talking about. Now the rest of it becomes blue because that disturbance is propagating out into the simulation. But it's not actually coming from the actual sourced velocity field. So you remember what it looked like before. This should look substantially less crazy than that first thing that we saw. I'm going to turn this back off for a second so we can see it and see what we got. I can already kind of tell looking through it that it's a little less crazy. Poosh. Pretty cool. We have a lot of these. This is pretty typical, though, of why you want to have velocity. And this is definitely a big production thing. This is often the kind of look you're going to get from simulations right out of the box, is this mushrooming look. It's not, the mushrooms aren't wrong. It's just what happens when fast-moving velocities meet air that's not moving. It's pushing against a thick air and is getting flattened out, and that's what that look is. Now, that's not often the case in the real world. There's often a little bit of movement from wind or from temperature moving through the air. But this isn't like that. This just has velocity that's not moving at all and a fast-moving velocity meeting it, and you get these mushroom looks. So actually having leading velocity can often be good for that. So one more time, delete it, and then if we play, you'll see that it's much more, you can see all the velocity streaking, pulling it right on the top. Now we did still have that one over there, but by and large, you see far less of it. So it depends on what your look is. For our purposes, I am actually going to keep masking it. I think because we're going to break it up with some of our microsolvers in the next frame. I also actually dropped this drag down without mentioning what exactly it did. Now, it's my bad, so let's circle back to that now. Drag is going to apply a velocity that is any velocity that's in opposition to this goal velocity. So here the goal velocity is 0, 0, 0. There's no angular velocity when it comes to these kinds of simulations. That would be more for like a rigid body kind of thing. But in any case, this is saying, hey, if your velocity is not 0, 0, 0, which is basically going to be any velocity, apply a force to get it back to this. Now that's a 0, 0, 0. Now that's a really long roundabout way of saying apply a force to get it back to 0, which means slow it down. And that's what a drag does. It's a drag on all this velocity, this energy in the system. This is very scale dependent. This is really what's going to have a lot to do with how big your simulation seems in the world. Because this is essentially air resistance. The farther away you are from something, the more apparent that's going to be. But you're always going to want to have some kind of drag to make it seem more like your stuff's moving in air. For example, if I start, so this is, we're gonna press this a lot too. This brain down here, this will enable and disable the simulation. You can just click it to enable, because I want to be able to like keyframe some stuff now. In particular, I want to have it start by seeding velocity and maybe continue seed velocity, but then maybe stop. Now, if there's no drag, it's as if you're in space. You're in a vacuum, by and large. It will just keep going. It should slow to a stop, though, because, again, air resistance. So that's what this drag is going to do. Once we get to a certain point, you'll see, and now that we're not going to be adding velocity into the system anymore, everything should come to a standstill, depending, on, of course, on how high the drag is. Even a low amount of drag should slow things down pretty fast. And we can see it coming to a stop now. Great. Which, again, pretty accurate. Think about if you've seen like a train or a factory belching smoke into the air. It shoots out because it has its velocity, but then it meets the reality of the atmosphere outside and it slows down. So here it is. And again, we play blast these things to see how it plays at speed. We can't really get a sense of it here in the 3D viewer. So poof, slows down, comes to a stop. And that's what it should do. Now it's still pretty ugly because of how big these shapes are. But again, that's what our microsolvers coming up next are gonna handle. But in the meantime, we covered getting density into the scene, we covered getting velocity into the scene, and we covered how to control those things, control them via masks, control them via drag, and things of that nature, and even control them via these keyframes. Cool. So next up is going to be our first work with some microsolvers.